So, first things first, I need to get my camera just right. So the first things first.
She's away. Hang on.
Oh,
She's gone.
oh,
Oh, she's gone. Just
I
at that
have to
opportune
wait.
moment.
That's okay. That's pretty good. That'll give me another minute.
Breathe.
My special guest. I have to have Avril in the audience for this.
Come back. Come back. Yeah, I was just checking with the team if they were downloading anything. You know, with the Wi-Fi in this building is not great. So I wanted to make sure I can see this beautiful BSL.
Oh, well. So, Jill and
Fantastic. Thank you.
Avril will have spotted all my mistakes in that, but basically, that was me trying to say that, hello, everyone. Today, we are welcoming Avril Hepner from the British Deaf Association, and she's going to be presenting to us on deaf culture, British Sign Language, and dementia. So I want to welcome Avril and Jill, the interpreter, and thank you ever so much for everybody for coming along today. I made a little mistake with my finger spelling, and there will be other mistakes as well. But the reason why I am able to do any of that at all is because of Avril. So a very quick introduction is Avril and I first met each other in 2018 when I was working with the Life Changes Trust, and we offered a small sum of money for them to do some genuinely groundbreaking work with deaf culture, BSL, and dementia, work that nobody had ever done before. And we've stayed in touch since then. And I feel that I haven't done enough for the British Deaf Association over the last couple of years at Age Scotland. So it's a delight to welcome Avril back today. And we're recording this, and we're going to be sharing the link because it's some fantastic stuff that the British Deaf Association and Avril and her colleagues have done over the last few years. I don't want to say too much more because I want it's the stage is Avril's, so I'm going to be quiet now, and I'm gonna let Avril have the screen if that's okay. So thank you very much. Welcome, Avril.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, it's really touching, actually. You know, I think back, Colm's right, you know, and it was so lovely to see you trying to bring forward that training and do some BSL. Thank you so much. Yeah. I think it's really rare that you see organizations actually being able to learn sign language and to be able to do that with people watching. You know, so it's really powerful. So thank you. I think it's always lovely to see that and to see that our work makes a difference. I'm really grateful to the Life Changes Trust, actually. It was such a powerful piece of work, a fantastic organisation, and they really provided the BD with a really opening opportunity to work in this area of deafness and dementia, because I think there was always been barriers to that. And the experiences, I suppose, of myself growing up as a Deaf BSL user from a deaf family have been quite extreme. My father had dementia himself, and when I think back to that, he's passed away now, sadly, but at that time, trying to just identify if there was something wrong, because there was clearly some memory problems there. And when I look back, over, I think it was the 7 years we completed the project over, it's very passionate to me. It's very, very close to my heart. The support we had, the interest we had, so many people from the deaf community were really interested in this area of work. But as Colm says, I do work for the BDA Scotland, and we develop very different resources. First of all, we obviously get out information in BSL for the deaf communities in Scotland in our first and preferred language. And we don't talk about we talk about deafness as quite wide ranging, deaf, hard of hearing, for example, but we focus solely on BSL. When I think about my father's experience, I didn't have any support at that time once he was trying to get diagnosis. And it was a struggle, but luckily I had a lot of support from other deaf people. I was lucky I worked in the BD Scotland, of course, and I had access to, for example, information that I was able to read. There was plenty of literature that I was able to access. I had interpreters to help me through the system because it was a struggle. So I think the aim of today really for us is to look at perhaps, or for you guys to at least think about what resources you have, think about what dementia means, look at some videos, and then, think about the caring community actually. We'll talk about some carers who cared for dementia sufferers themselves, talk about their experiences. And when it comes to dementia, it's the same whether you're deaf or hearing. I don't think it's any different in that way. The difference is the access and the cultural knowledge is required is different. And I will explain much more about that actually as we move forward. So we will have some video, and then I will talk about various other strands, and I'm sure Colm is going to help me with the slides. Is that right? I sent the presentation to you. Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. I see you nodding. Perfect.
I'm
So,
slightly nervous. I was just explaining to everybody at the start of the call that my glamorous assistant Ali isn't here, and he always gives me the technical advice. So I will try my best, and if I don't know how to do something, I'm going to ask for some support at the room.
I could do the slides if you need me to do it, Colm, myself.
I do have the slides here, so it might be a case of sharing it on my computer, but then obviously we want to be able to see Avril and Jill as well. So prepare yourself for a little bit of farce.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, what we can do is, yeah, it's okay. We don't have to change anything, to be honest. I can just look at the slides. So don't worry too much. Just see how we go.
What I will do is I have the slides here, and I'll certainly be sharing them with everybody afterwards anyway.
Yeah, that's perfect. No
Magic.
problem. Okay, see how you go.
And there will be, just to say that there will be opportunity at the end for some questions as well. So we'll just see how it goes. But yeah, the stage is Avril's.
Okay. So are you going to share that slide now?
Let's see. I'm gonna try. If I bring up the slides on my own computer. So I really am useless at these things. Slideshow.
I'm sure it's fine.
Current slide.
Whilst Colm is doing that,
So what I'm going to do.
I have been involved in maybe 3 or 4 different projects. The first one was creating a kind of fact sheet on dementia about what it is in general. And then I was also interviewed, it was about accessible information and resources in BSL. And then I did go along to University of Stirling And some of you may know that they have rooms of, there's like a kitchen and a toilet and various situations that they've set up. And we filmed some videos in BSL so that people could make the connection about that space and make it into a more visual language so they could understand that area better. We also had a project on how to make your home more dementia friendly. Oh, here we go. Perfect. Okay. Now, yeah, so I can only see Avril. This is Jill speaking, so I'm going to change there we go. I can see everybody now.
Is that okay? It's not ideal, I think, because you can see the little bit to the side. So I'm very keen that everybody can see that okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Good stuff. Yep.
Is that okay?
I think
And
you need to start the slideshow, Com. So click on slideshow at the top.
So I was just going to click on each.
No,
Oh,
you can make it just happen. Yeah, from current slide. That's it.
Thank you,
And then,
Janice.
and then just hit enter whenever you
well
want to move forward to the next slide.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Janice. Is that okay with everybody?
Yep. Yeah, that's fine. Perfect. I wanted to talk about how you make, we were talking about BSL and dementia more friendly in your communities. And obviously I talk about my community, but I'm talking about yours now, as a hearing community, meeting people who you come into contact with. And remember, when we talk about deafness, it is wide ranging. Today I'm talking about sign language users, and how if you meet a deaf person who uses a language, for example, so not specifically someone who is speech with hearing loss. It is about a BSL user, how you'd welcome them into your organization and into a friendly environment. And there's obviously I think it's some situations might not be suitable for a deaf person and vice versa. So for example, when we talk about music, think, oh, it's great, we'll give them some music, and that's good for dementia, people who have dementia and Alzheimer, but actually it's just not applicable. There's a lot of things involved in music, but with deaf people we're unable to use that facility in that way. So we have to adapt a situation and come up with an alternative, really, and to think about how you'd welcome someone in and what would you be able to do. So we talk about music, we talk about how would you communicate with someone if you weren't a user of the language, just to think about making a space more friendly. Okay, and I'm open to try and give you some examples in order to do that. So it means there might be situations that you'll have to really consider and think about. And I'm not saying, I'll be able to give you everything today, every tip that I have, but I'll try and give you some intel in the next hour. So if you can move on to the next slide. Lovely. So, with the BDA column, as obviously has mentioned, he's maybe giving you some resources, and there is a website page here that you can utilize, and it gives you some information on dementia. And it was really interesting, actually, because when I started, it was just about looking at the deaf community. We weren't thinking about subtitles. I thought hearing people really started asking me about what does this say, because we didn't make it accessible in that way. And as Com says, we were involved in the Life Change Trust, and I think then we started thinking about how will people know about this. So I think those additional resources came later, I think after, and then we added that as a subtitle facility. And so you'll see more and more. I don't think that was the original aim. But I think that's why when we talk about this being part of deaf culture, this silence, this visual spatial language that we use, but we do need to add in some extra time when it comes to subtitles and captioning. Yeah, there's time for filming, of course, but then there's that additional time and editing used for subtitling. And it might be, you know, if you're just doing a normal film with speech, it's really quick, it's easy to do, but actually you're thinking about how those subtitles match up with the BSL. So I suppose it's thinking about your own resources here, if you have additional subtitles there, or if you were going to get any BSL produced or translated, thinking about that time it would take. And there's obviously some examples on that website. I think there's probably about 50 or 60 different videos, and I know that one of them I'll show you on the next slide, Colm, if you can put that forward. Yeah, here we go. So I think every year, you know, I try to think about themes in general, and every year we have like Cancer Awareness Week, and we have, you know, Alzheimer Week, and, you know, Carers Week. So there's always something coming up, and we filmed a lot of deaf people who themselves are carers, and they perhaps look after their husband or wife, and they're both deaf. It's not a situation when it's a hearing person looking after a deaf BSL user and vice versa. They are both deaf, and we were able to film their story and their journey and their experiences and the problems that came along with that and how hard it was. This person himself, his wife had about, I think for about 12 or 13 years, his wife had dementia, and both deaf. And eventually it was problematic, and she was moved into a care home. And from then, unfortunately, her health went downhill. So I think once you move into that facility, it can be really difficult. And this gentleman really was very emotional. He was going every day to see his wife, even when she didn't recognize him, because it was the only BSL that she had. No one in the facility and the care home was able to use BSL. So there was absolutely no communication with staff, with anyone else there, apart from when her husband came. And that's just a quite a normal situation. I think when we talk about late diagnosis, you know, we mention that because really there isn't any proper assessment in terms of BSL users. And by then, once diagnosis has been provided, then it's perhaps too late. And I think people think, oh, they're deaf, but they can still speak. And actually, that's not the case. You know, it might be that someone goes to their GP, goes to the doctor. There's some situation, you know, that the partner might feel, oh, you know, my wife's suffering, but I'm not really sure what it is. And then they'll need an interpreter to come in that. So it does take time. Next slide, please, Colm. Thank you. And again, you know, the University of Stirling, they were just immense. You know, they took this deaf group, they had a tour, we went to the university. It might be yourselves has visited there, I'm not sure. I mean, it was really nothing, you know, specifically to do with deaf. It was just we did take people there as a tour. And once we were there, we realised there was so many visuals in these spaces, the dining room, you know, the corridor, and there was a lot of questions. So it was a really interesting day. We did have interpreters there to facilitate language. And the deaf people were able to explain how they felt and what was important to them. It was such an enjoyable day, you know, to look around everything. And then eventually we agreed to partner with the university and to film each room. And to do a short translation of that space. That was available. It has subtitles there, as I've said, so you yourself hopefully will get the links to those and you can look at them. And one of my projects really was to try and encourage, you know, people to make their home more deaf friendly in that way, deafness and dementia friendly at least. And that was really a successful resource to allow that to happen. It was a lot of hard work. And, you know, I would say, you know, it was just between the whole COVID situation. You know, we were in Stirling, we were masks on, you know, we had to obviously adhere to the rules at that time. But we feel it is a very strong legacy. It won't go out of date, you know, it'll still be there. You know, people will still be able to use that as a resource. And, you know, even after the deaf people that are involved are no longer here, there'll still be that facility, I think. There is other resources. But some of I think the equipment that they had in these spaces weren't particularly applicable to deaf people. You know, they had phones, for examples. You know, we would perhaps use iPads instead. And, you know, so there are adaptations you would have to make. But on the whole, I think it's a great resource there. And I think now that resource is there, deaf people can speak to their carers and provide that as a signposting mechanism for them to have a look and get that intel themselves. Next slide, please.
Oh, oh dear. Sorry, my computer is, aha, that's better.
Perfect, thank you so much. So at the BDA, we obviously had this big project with the Life Changes Trust, and you know, it was fantastic because, you know, we created this toolkit, and that was created by deaf people themselves, and it was created by deaf carers, and also it involved interpreters, and it involved, you know, us at the BDA. But we didn't create it ourselves. Obviously, it was very much co-produced by everyone. And I think it was over 1 year. We had a lot of involvement. We went through various stages and set it up in stages as well. It was talked about early diagnosis. We talked about the journey people had to take, the effect on people's lives, what to expect. When deaf people have to perhaps go into a care home. And all through that journey, it was apparent there were barriers. It was very, very difficult. Communication was a barrier, just getting that information. So it was really good to be able to set out this toolkit for everyone. And when we talk about that diagnosis, you might have, for example, a power of attorney, you might have, you know, do you have a will in place? There was a lot of this as part of the early discussions when it comes to diagnosis, whether they have capacity. And for deaf people, they've not really had that information, you know, to talk about, you know, having what a power of attorney means, what the, you know, a will would mean to them, for example. So that information had to be made available and translated, so that people understood what that meant and how it would affect them moving forward if their capacity diminished. So we really want to make sure that resources are bilingual. They're both available in English and BSL at the same time. At the BDA, we like to make sure that if it's written in English, it is then translated into BSL and disseminated at the same time. So we have some parity there for both hearing and deaf audiences. We think it's important that we ensure that culturally people are being provided this information in their first and preferred language. So the toolkit was really successful for deaf and hearing communities, care homes, people who are involved in dementia. And then this is the other project that we had. We talked about deaf people with dementia in care homes throughout Scotland. And this project was again through COVID. And I mean, we looked at trying to find resources. We looked at Manchester. They have a very specialist area there. There is a PhD deaf student who was really, you know, experienced in dementia, and they worked with us and worked together with us and 12 care homes. There were 6 that they had deaf people, 6 care homes already had deaf people there, and there were 6 without. And that would be quite new to them. So we interviewed both environments in that way versus deaf people without deaf people. And again, it was through COVID. So there was a lot of research, a lot of surveys, talking to people. And I'm sure again, Colm will send you the link, but it talked about various issues, recommendations, short, medium and long-term goals and recommendations. And I do have some examples actually on the next slide that we could show you. Thank you. So as I said, talking about research. There are some of the main findings and the recommendations. We have different perspectives, of course. Language and communication was really problematic in care homes. Sign language is a visual spatial medium, and unfortunately, you know, they don't use spoken language. It's very, very different. The language and communication, the cultural needs, transitions into a care home versus homes that have deaf BSL users in them and homes that do not. It's very different. And also having that list of recommendations, as I mentioned, the short, medium, and longer term ambitions. Next slide, please. So you know that we have the BSL Scotland Act now, 2015, and that states within the legislation that under the law, obviously, you know, BSL users are entitled to the same health and social well-being and that access as their hearing peers. So, you know, there are, I think, within the new national plan, we have 45 actions. And one of them talks about health and well-being. And then so that's action number 23. And then we know that the National Care Service has been mentioned various times. And what we've tried to instill in government is please don't forget about us. Please don't forget about BSL users in the NCS, you know, about our language, our culture, our access needs. So I think we really want to be, you know, keeping on that path. Also, when we talk about social isolation and loneliness, particularly with deaf people, a lot of deaf people resist going into a care home. I'm sure everyone does, but as a BSL user, they know it can be particularly problematic because there isn't a lot of communication. Staff within these care homes don't necessarily sign, and their health and well-being can go downhill very, very rapidly. Now we have a lot of dementia cafes, perhaps provided through Alzheimer's Scotland and so on and so forth, and those are great. But unfortunately, deaf people have said it doesn't really work for them. Yeah, it's not working because deaf people are very isolated in their own communities. And if they want to go to a dementia cafe, there's no communication. There's plenty of discussion going on. You know, carers will go along and they maybe have a separate chance to talk about how they're feeling, but there's no communication. So it's not really deaf friendly because at the end of the day, who's going to pay for the interpreter? Who's going to allow that deaf person to be involved? You know, so again, we can't think about, well, will we have our own deaf dementia cafe? But again, it's impossible because people are spread out through Scotland. So how do we get them all together? So, you know, I think when it comes to the National Care Service, we've tried to feed back to any consultation to say it's not one size fits all. I'm not sure there can be a consistent approach to it. So yeah, we've asked them not to forget about us. Next slide, please. So I really want to instill in you the importance of choice, okay? And there's three particularly. Deaf people don't have a choice. I think the hearing community, you can have a look, tour different places, look at information that's available, think, what's going to be my preference? What's going to be beneficial to me? And really make an informed decision about which care home you would like to go to or your family to go to. When it comes to deaf people, there's really no choice for deaf care in Scotland. There's nothing specific for the deaf BSL using community, a specific care home to go to. So deaf people have to fit into the majority care homes. And that is becoming an issue because deaf people are really resisting to go into a hearing care home because they know they won't be able to communicate. They know that people won't understand their culture. In England, for example, I think there's perhaps two or three specific care homes that are for deaf people. But in Scotland, there's none. So it's really important that we think about how we find a solution for this with deaf people involved. Also, I think a lot of, as I said before, dementia cafes, a lot of services will say, oh, we'll just get an interpreter, but who pays for it? So whenever you're thinking about services and thinking about needs, you have to think whether you have a budget for any communication support that you need, so that that isn't going to be a problem. You know, again, when it comes to carers, because they might well need that interpretation as well. We also have deaf advocates, of course. You know, we talk about that. There's not many. I did do that job in the past, and we did receive funding for that, but unfortunately that funding has now ceased. So when it comes to trying to find a deaf advocate, it can be problematic, but if you can, it's good because they have empathy, they understand, you know, the language, the culture, the behaviours, the norms of deaf BSL users. So it's very rare to find somebody. A lot in the past, we did have a lot. We had deaf social workers as well, and that has now really lessened over years. But it was great when we did have specific deaf specialist social workers because they understood the situation. And some people will say, oh, well, anybody can advocate. I don't know if I would agree with that because it's quite specific to understand the culture and the barriers that we have and that exist there. Okay, thank you for that, Colin. So when some of this, you know, the issues that we see, when we talk about some were not satisfied that these facilities were able to meet their needs, you know, residential care, for example, finding the information, there was no resources available for them. And I think that was one thing that was particularly worrying, was like how the community that they would be being placed in would be able to adapt to a sign language user. Also, having carers coming in, booking interpreters, might there be too much music and singing or reliance on those genres, because you know we know that people who suffer from dementia like to listen to old music and stuff, but actually that's not applicable to a deaf person, so they feel really neglected as a result. They're waiting on someone coming in to sign. When it's a hard of hearing person, fine, they might have hearing aids and they might have some residual hearing, for example, there might be a loop system fitted, but when it comes to deaf BSL users, that's not a facility they can use. We think about further planning, and I think what's really important is that knowing all about me. Now that's a template perhaps to talk about, oh, you know, this resident likes coffee, they like this to eat, they like this as a hobby, activity, you know, what are their needs? And I think we need to think about creating a template for BSL users. So when they become a resident in a home, there's a focus on their culture and history, and what they need, not particularly reliant on the norms of a hearing community when they like to listen to music and so on and so forth. So thinking more visually, I think. So for music, that wouldn't be applicable. Also, that final point there, we talk about, you know, a good standard of care. Yeah. And actually there'll be some assessments, but then how does that assessor necessarily understand or be deaf aware, let's say? So how do you prepare for that when you go to carry out an assessment? Do you have to adapt the assessment form, or do you you know, really consider a deaf awareness approach and how you need to adapt things? And it's really important because I do feel there's a big gap when it comes to care and support work. You know, a care support group, for example. So having that facility in your communities, I think you have to think about, you know, that, because carers talk all the time. You know, they'll come together and, you know, talk about situations. When it comes to deaf people, they don't have access to that. You know, it can be a really difficult a traumatic experience that somebody's encountered. and they perhaps don't have any support to be able to offload that to someone, something that's particularly been difficult in their lives. I think deaf people just see themselves as survivors. You know, they just have to keep going regardless and soldier on. Next slide, please, Colin. So these were, you know, some points I really wanted to stress. Again, when we talked about deafness linked to the ear, so, you know, hard of hearing, deafened, they wear a hearing aid, for example, but they have acquired English, they have speech. But, you know, it can be really confusing when we talk about cultures. Please don't get confused between deafness or deaf and BSL, because it is very different culturally. So, you know, we do feel that deaf BSL users are excluded from the normal activities that you see. And that is what we see a lot. We find that deaf people, BSL users, can't often get involved in activities because they are reliant on speech. They're not relying on any, you know, visual mean, really. So it's something to consider when it comes to that. Also, getting people together, maybe watching movies, which is obviously really nice, you know, the old films, the silent films, you know, that are very visual. Deaf people love those. Charlie Chaplin, they absolutely love Charlie Chaplin, or anything, you know, the old horror movies, because there was really no speech in those. It was just very much about the performance and the acting, and it was very visual. There was very little speech if there was a lot. Also think about perhaps offering deaf programs, deaf films, so that, you know, people see their language, and feel that connection. I know on the BBC now, obviously we have See Here, we have BSL Zone, and that is programs that are regularly made by deaf people themselves. So we have the BSL Zone channel as well. So there are facilities there that are applicable to deaf people. So I think within your own communities, also think about maybe, you know, deaf friendly, you know, somebody coming in, you get befrienders coming in, like having that support. So if you have a befriender, it means that they can have that empathy again, share that culture, use that same language, and they can actually identify if there's problems, because they share that culture, that language, those cultural norms and behavioral norms. So they're able to actually identify any issues and pass it on to care staff, who can then, you know, take that up to management. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk really briefly about, you know, making your deaf club more deaf friendly, because, you know, I think this is a really good area, and it was a project that we did. This is a deaf club already deaf friendly, yeah, but they were dementia friendly, because they didn't know how to do that. So I came along, we did some training. I went to 5 or 6 deaf clubs. I visited them all twice, went and talked to them, went away and came back again, maybe a few months later, just to see if we could continually improve the situation. And the deaf clubs were so thrilled to get that. They've really tried to make changes. You can go to the next slide. Thanks, Colin. So this is Kilmarnock Deaf Club. And in the past, the walls were really plain. There was nothing visual, you know. And I said to them, do you have any trophies? Do you have any really old photos, historic things that you've probably got lying in a cupboard or in a box somewhere? And they were like, yeah. I was like, well, why? Bring them out. Get them on the wall. People with dementia will see the photos and remember some of these buildings or people. And it starts a conversation. So you can see here, they made a change. Those two pictures you see on the photo on the left, they were really old deaf ministers in Scotland, the missionaries, you would say. So they started the churches, the deaf churches in Scotland, the missions, but they would rely on finger spelling, but they were there. The other pictures that you see on the right-hand side there, they were strongly covered sport activity. Deaf people, deaf clubs are really high on different sports. So a lot of people went to the Deaf Olympics, for example. They played football, pool, bowling. So we had loads of trophies. So the deaf people loved that. They loved to see it. And of course, it jogged their memories like, oh, I was involved in this before. And it started those conversations and memories came to the fore. So it was really lovely to see. Really powerful. So that's improved and they've continued to do that. I think it was a really nice, inviting, warm space now after they, tidied it up a little and put those pictures up. So I would encourage that, if there's any facility, if you've got any spaces like that, to make sure that you have plenty old historic photos, just information that will jog their memories and feel that affiliation with everything. Next slide, please. Of course, you know this, it comes in care homes, you often have, or, deaf cafe or whatever. You'll have visuals, whatever they're selling. If it's in sign language, we might say, what do you want? Do you want a sandwich? But some people with dementia, their communication can slip and they might well forget some of it. So we try and get, pictures that someone is able to point to. And it is a work in progress, but it means it improves that situation. So I'm really trying to teach these deaf clubs things that were based on my own experiences that helped me, and I'm trying to facilitate that. So that has really worked well. So this slide, actually, I did mention films, but we also created like a flashcard, I suppose you would call them, like a wee postcard. So we created those. As I said before, we looked at, now let me think about this. So I don't know if you know Sport Memory Scotland. So they created a lot of lovely photographs, and it was really thanks to them, because I kept looking at them and looking at their resources, and I thought, these are really fantastic, but they're not particularly applicable to deaf people. But I thought I could use that and create something for our community. As I mentioned, Charlie Chaplin is the lovable rogue and everybody loved him. And, so what we did was we created these and we left them with the deaf clubs. And when someone came in with dementia, they showed them the flashcards, and that started conversations about Laurel and Hardy or Charlie Chaplin or whatever that was. But the conversation started, and the whole point of that was for people to feel welcomed and feel part of the club still, as they were struggling with their dementia. Next slide, thanks. Maybe you're looking at this equipment and thinking, what is this? Yeah. Well, this is deaf equipment that's been around for a long time. And this was how we communicated years ago. Yeah. When I was growing up, this is what we had in the home. It was called a minicom. And so, remember the old phones, the old handset and the blower. Yeah. Obviously times have moved forward. We now got mobile phones, but we used to have these minicoms, and that's how we communicated. Somebody would, pick up the phone, you would lay it on top, the handset, and it would work between somebody hearing into English. I would read that and vice versa. So somebody would put the handset on top. As you can see, these are two different versions, and they would type and I would see it on the screen. and then I would type back. You know, one of them, you can see it would flash, yeah? So it would let me know that someone was calling because it'd be flashing. So it's very visual, but it did mean that we thought, do you know what? Equipment is really important. It's been important in a deaf person's life. So we created the flashcards to show them the equipment that we would have used. For you guys, obviously that it wouldn't be applicable, but it would remind them of the equipment that they use. So these were just equipment that we utilized within the community. So when someone came in, we used them if we wanted to start conversations, and people, it would jog their memories, and they would, you know, talk about stories and examples of maybe what happened with their mini com, and oh, remember the time this happened. And so it was really, really good. I think probably we created about 30 different materials, and 10 were perhaps linked to different pieces of equipment, adaptations. 10 were perhaps, you know, movies, Laurel and Hardy, Chaplin, and so on. And then also probably 10 about really famous areas of Scotland, places in Scotland that people would say, oh, you know, I went there on holiday, or I remember going to Glasgow, or different landmarks throughout Scotland that they would remember. And I'm really hoping that they'll continue to develop those and perhaps include different movies, you know, perhaps maybe newer things, the Flintstones, you know, I don't know, different movies that are a bit newer. I think the whole point of doing this, though, is to have these materials, and based on their needs, really, but in a way that they understand. So it's matching their culture, the behavioural norms, and that they can still feel involved in the community. They can be warmly welcomed into the Deaf Club that they've visited for years. The Deaf Club, I should add, always plays bingo. Deaf people absolutely love a game of bingo. And you know, it's the number one. It is the thing that they love is in terms of activity. When people have dementia, it can be problematic. So we have to come up with an alternative. So it might be, you know, finding an activity that they can do. So again, it's finding things that are culturally appropriate. Okay, now I think these are just examples of course. I think that's probably my last slide, Colm. Might move on to questions now. Yes, it is. So any questions, you can put that down now, Colm, I suppose. Any questions from anyone? Or do I pass back to you, Colm, to facilitate that?
Oh, everybody, just please do. If I can change the view, everybody is very welcome to ask any questions that if you have any. If not, I will step in. But please do ask some questions.
Any questions?
Hi, sorry, my camera's not working. Hiya.
Hi, Carol.
Hiya. My name's Carol Reddington. I'm the manager of a third sector day support service for older people in Fife. And I just wanted to ask if when you were looking at care homes and things, did you look at day support facilities as well? Because this is quite eye-opening for me. We've got people that are hard of hearing, but nobody that actually requires BSL, and it just gives you food for thought. So I just wondered if the recommendations for care homes would run similar for day centre services.
Thank you, Carol. That's a really good question. Yeah, actually, I think that's really something I've been considering, that service, because when we talk about residential care, we did focus on that. We didn't really look at day support care. I think we wanted to see, because obviously there's a lot of care at home now, and we wanted to see if there was something that we have in place that might be useful to day support services as well. For example, how to book an interpreter, the toolkit, you know, some of the resources that we created. So it might be useful in that way. I think if you're able to read some of those links that we'll provide, you know, that might be useful. It's something that you perhaps can think about and get in contact with me about. But yeah, I think I would imagine that a lot of things will be similar. When we talk about, you know, I guess BSL users, I'm probably, in that respect, I probably think there's not a lot of people that will use daycare services. They might be resistant to that. I suppose you need to think about a budget if that was the case. What would be suitable for that as well? But we did focus on, I suppose, residential more than daycare, unfortunately. But I've mentioned the cafe and mentioned various things today, and I expect there might be some similar points that you could pick up from the literature, but please email me if there's any questions or thoughts that you have after you read that literature once Colm circulates the slides and stuff again.
Yeah, that's great, Avril, thanks.
No problem, Carol, thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions?
I'm gonna, oh,
Sorry,
no,
Colm.
no, Helen, go
can I
ahead.
leap in?
Helen, you go first. Ladies first.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Helen McGregor. I work with Marie Curie, and it's not so much a question, but I just thought maybe a helpful point to share. A while ago, I attended a conversation cafe that was supported by BSL interpreters at a deaf hub. And one of the things that was fed back was somebody shared an experience where they'd had carers in their home because, so Marie Curie staff carers in their home because one of their parents was in the end stages of life, they were dying, and it was really enlightening how difficult it was for the person who really needed an interpreter there because they weren't the main carer. And so our nursing staff were able to support the family, but the information wasn't then getting fed through to the deaf person. And so I guess I'm not asking a question, I'm just saying I'm really pleased to see that you've got resources, and I'll make sure that I share them onwards with our teams. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
No, absolutely. That's great, Helen. Thank you. Just in response to that, it is a really important point. And, you know, for example, when my father had dementia when he was alive, you know, he didn't pass away because of his dementia. He passed away because he had prostate cancer. And it meant that his care plan, as you say, you know, with Marie Curie, I guess, perhaps similar, you know, any other services, penumbra, whatever it might be, you know, I think it's a struggle to understand because the deaf person is almost having a double whammy, if you like. I didn't have dementia, but my dad had it. Then he had prostate cancer. I was trying to access the information. He was deaf as well. So it was like, who pays for the interpreter? And it was really problematic because I needed help. I needed help to understand what was happening to my father, what was going to be his journey, how it was going to be for him. And I was lucky, and I guess, you know, we had access to interpreters. But what I would say is, and what's really important is, you know, I was lucky, I work in the deaf community, I worked in advocacy, I know how it works, I know how to support someone. But it's really important that it was only 2 or 3 of the same interpreters working with me and my dad throughout that journey, because they knew exactly what was happening. They were familiar with the situation. We didn't have a massive pool of people that were coming in and rotating and different interpreters. It meant my dad had a familiar face. it just can't be any interpreter. You know, some interpreters aren't good with dementia, for example. You really need training for interpreters to work with people who are experiencing dementia and how to adapt your language to be able to have that flexibility. So it was important for me that my dad especially felt comfortable with the interpreter who would be in that space with other practitioners. So I think every appointment I went with my father, we had one of the same interpreters, and I would think to myself, God, that's great, we've got the right person in the room, the right interpreter's here, because I really had to battle with the interpreting service, the agency, to make sure that they provided me with the same interpreters. And that was a battle in itself, but luckily we were able to win that battle. So they committed to that, and they had a series of appointments put in place to make sure that happened. Any other questions?
I'm looking around to see. I'm going to jump in and ask a question on behalf of dementia-friendly communities, because I'm thinking one of the reasons why we wanted Avril to come along today is to encourage and support dementia-friendly communities and groups that are out there working every day. If there is a person or people in the local area that is a Deaf BSL user that could possibly be living with dementia, could possibly be showing the signs of dementia, or could be a carer for somebody affected by dementia, or even a lot of the groups that are just working with older people. If there is a Deaf BSL user in the community, how can we support those groups to reach out to that person? And what can the British Deaf Association do? I think there's something in the resources that I've shared, but it's just if Avril had anything. Avril, if you have anything to add to a community group that is aware of somebody in the community that they could possibly help, and they're a Deaf BSL user, what can people do?
Ooh, that's a really loaded question. Oh, wow, yeah. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I realised on my own journey, you know, with deaf people, you know, I've had deaf and hearing people ask me about this, about information, and have emailed me and saying they're struggling a bit. And, you know, my feeling is that each person, you know, whether they're in a care home or they're in day support service, it's in a cafe, dementia cafe. I think a deaf befriender is a really good supportive way, I think. So if you identify somebody in your community, I think getting another deaf person with the dementia sufferer, let's say, because they will be able to really relate to them. So trying to source that, you know, volunteer or something that would help, maybe even in the short term, just to provide some solutions and insights. Of course, with everything, it talks about funding, and you know, it would be great if we had this endless amount of money that we could set up different support services for this. But again, you know, it could be, but we can signpost to different organisations, maybe local deaf clubs, maybe, you know, find where there's your local deaf club. You might be surprised, there might be people within there that would be interested in doing a bit of volunteering or visiting a care home and having a blether with somebody, you know, just so that they're sharing that same language. You know, and it's not always about, oh well, this person's a professional and they know better. That's not always the case. You know, I think getting someone who lives and breathes it is really important as well. As I said to Colin before, you know, we talk about, you know, your communities might be very, very active and you do fantastic work. You know, and when we did that work with the Life Change Trust and Age Scotland or whatever we've done, we want to make sure that we're creating something that is going to be a resource for everyone and a legacy on the projects that we do. But we realise that not everything that is created in the hearing world will be applicable to the deaf world. It's just not relevant. And I think people have that perspective that, oh, well, that's not relevant to me. And I often ask the question when I come up against this saying, have you ever thought of deaf people? And 90% of the time they don't, you know, because they think that everybody can read English because they grew up here or something. So, you know, it's about asking deaf people themselves, you know, also deaf blind people, remember, because they will be BSL users as well. So just to think about that. It might not have answered your question fully, Colm, sorry, but, you know, I think it is an issue that we have out there. So it is about just seeing if you can get somebody who shares that culture and shares that knowledge. I think coming together regularly, you know, like this, just like this today, asking, having like a question and answer session, allowing that knowledge to be shared, that then you can go away and champion and share as well. I think that's a really important thing. What we're trying to do is increase the workforce as well of deaf people. I did ask Colm before, you know, in Age Scotland, I was like, where's your deaf workers? Where are they? Yeah, because it would be lovely to see, you know, part of the national plan in Scotland, the Scottish Government, you know, it talks about creating a really strong, diverse workforce. And, you know, where are deaf workers? Where are they? In your own communities, in your own organisations. I think you would save a lot of money and resource if you brought in a deaf worker, because they would absolutely know what was required. So it's really something to think about.
Thank you so much. That was partly for myself, but also partly on behalf of anybody who's not here. Jane, would you like to ask something?
Yep.
Thank you. Yes. Just wondering, with isolation and loneliness, we do a home visiting reminiscence service, but I wondered if there was online befriending for BSL speakers. We could facilitate matching, but I don't know if there is such a thing.
Good question, actually. Yeah, it's a really good point raised, Jane. I think when I'm talking about how we're going to move forward with our projects here, again, I said before, befrienders and deaf people are very, you know, isolated in their communities. They can live very rurally as well. I think there's a lot of deaf people aren't great with digitalization, let's say, but they also don't, particularly where they live, they might not have good signals and stuff. And as dementia takes hold, they might struggle with the sign language as well, you know, in a 2D medium, let's say online. But it is a good option to have, and I think it's definitely something to look at, perhaps like a pilot. I know other organisations have tried to provide general befrienders, but not specifically for people who have dementia, funnily enough. Just in normal, general, somebody going to the shops or whatever, but not somebody with dementia. And during COVID, I remember, there really wasn't an opportunity, and I think we really wanted to set something up then. Hopefully that's something we could perhaps do in the future, but it's a really good point raised, Jane. It's definitely something that I would like to look at.
I might email you because we would be happy to work with you on that. I'll email you.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you.
I think that's a lovely way to end. Thank you very much indeed to Avril and also to Jill for your help. The one piece of news that I would just highlight to everybody at the end of this meeting is you may all be aware that yesterday the anti-stigma campaign was released by the Scottish Government. It's going to run for 5 weeks. There are extensive BSL resources with that as well. But it's just something for you all to be aware of, because something that I've been aware of as we've been doing some community events recently is all the challenges and all the difficulties and all the complaints and all the barriers that people have been experiencing as people living with dementia and carers is made so much more difficult if your first language is BSL, and all the cultural and social disconnections that come with that. So it's worth bearing in mind. Thank you ever so much again, Avril. And thank you very much for everybody for coming along today. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then I'm going to distribute it to everybody with all the resources, just to make sure that everybody has them, and please share them widely. So thank you very much again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Colm, can you just stay on while everybody goes, just so I can have a quick chat?
I absolutely will. Thank you very much, Avril, and goodbye, everybody. I'll be in touch very soon. Thank you.